Yeah, there's different types of business-to-business customers. There's companies that consume, like original equipment manufacturers, users. There's government agencies. So these could be things like local governments, like the council, state. It could be things like the vehicle servicing agencies. It can be DEFRA, things like that. You've got the actual government, and then the country itself. So there's lots of different government agencies out there, all of which can be considered business-to-business customers. There's also institutions, so things like hospitals, universities, schools, all things like that are institutions. And then there's resellers, so things like wholesalers, brokers, people who buy up products and then resell them. Obviously, it's in the name, resellers. Business markets very much consider the types of business customers there are out there, the types of products being sold, the size and location of customers. So often the size of the customers can be small and the locations can be quite geographically dispersed. So for instance, in motorsport, a lot of it's situated around Silverstone, all around Oxford, all around that kind of area, Milton Keynes. You've got the manufacturers who supply into it, the supply chain, all based around there. Don't get me wrong, there are some exceptions, but largely you can look at the geography and to find it. For instance, Sheffield, the steel mills up there's a lot of supply chains. Airbus down in Bristol, there's the supply chain built around that, all located locally. There's also the purchasing standards and processes that we need to look at, and the nature of the demand, which is all dependent on the type of organisation you're buying into. So what is the definition of business markets? So business markets can be defined as markets for products and services, local to international, bought by businesses, government bodies and institutions for consumption, for use and for resale. So you'll notice in this definition those 5 types of resellers are in there. Right. But what we're going to look at is the fact that there are both pure goods and pure services, and actually it's not one or the other, and often it's an actual spectrum that exists. So you can consider things like raw materials to be raw good, to be iron, like such as iron ore, to be the pure good, as you know, it is what it is. There's not a huge amount of relationship in it. You know where to get it from, you know where the suppliers are, you know how to use it. They'll go to smelters will then smelt it. You then have the machines, cutting tools, and along that iron ore process into the manufacturing of the goods itself. Those are all those goods, but there are varying degrees of services within that. And as you move along that continuum, you end up with things in the middle, like agency staff. Yes, those organisations sell a good, and that's the people that do the job, but actually it's a service. They are fulfilling your needs. They're providing you with a service that allows you to flex your employee base. You can grow and shrink on demand. You can be really responsive, so you don't have to take on overhead. So that's a service, and that's why I've put that in the middle of this continuum. As we move away from the goods side of it to the consulting side of it, that becomes almost entirely intangible, whereby it becomes more of a knowledge economy. And often in the service side of the continuum, it is you who is the product, or the organisation that is the product. It's the organisation that gets formed by the service. Okay, so you've got the intangible dominance, which is on the one side, and that is in the pure services side, all the way to the ones that are very tangible. And the example I gave was iron ore, machines. They're very tangible. You can see them, touch them, feel them. And there's varying, as you move along that spectrum, there's varying degrees of service and tangibility. So the more service, the more intangible it becomes, and the more goods it is, the more tangible it becomes. So business to business markets can't be underestimated. So business to consumer markets is often what comes to mind first, especially fast moving consumer goods. You can think of the toothpastes, the crisps, the shoes, cars, all of that comes to mind first and foremost. And that's great, but actually business markets have a higher dollar value. They have more financial return. They represent a bigger market financially than the consumer markets. And that is because even in the consumer market, there is the supply chain behind it that actually feeds into that market, that actually enables that product to be made and sold to you and I. But actually, it's the supply chains that we will talk about in a moment that comes behind it that we don't see, that actually forms a bigger financial value. All right. Business marketing is, like we mentioned before, can be to a range of organizations. So why are we looking at business marketing? Well, actually, half of the graduates that leave Bath will go into business marketing. Okay. And actually, some years it's a lot more, and very rarely is it less. So your very career may well be in business to business marketing. It accounts for half of the economic activity in this country. It's huge in terms of opportunity, and there's actually also a huge opportunity to make a real impact in businesses, and small and medium-sized enterprises often are business to business. Okay. Its distinguishing factors just include the nature of the customer. The customers are different to you and I, and actually it can be a huge range of things, from small enterprises, big conglomerates, right through to one-man bands. So the actual nature of the customer, how they operate, is very different, and actually how customers use the product is also different. So you really do look at those in greater detail in here to come. Now, business to business marketing is unique in the fact that there is a relationship that gets set up with it. Very rarely is it transactional. There's different types of purchases, which we will talk about in the consumer buying behavior, but actually the one-off purchases can be transactional, paper, toner, the kind of things that don't need a great deal of knowledge input. But the reality is, in business to business, often customers need to be educated about the product. The supplier needs to understand the problem. It's not a case of here's an off-the-shelf product that you're going to buy. Actually, it becomes much more of a network approach where the product gets tailored to the individual and the organization that's buying it. It becomes very collaborative. Okay, whereas you and I, when we go to a shop, we buy something, I hand over the money, I get a dress or whatever we're buying, and that's transactional. In business, it becomes very collaborative. And also, it becomes very contractual. So you often have to put out bids, you often have to put out tenders, it becomes a contractual buying process. Because the value of the transactions are often far higher, that's why it gets bound up in contracts. Okay? So there's a real difference between business to business and business to consumer. I'm going to touch on it here, but we're going to go into greater detail in the coming weeks. So in the organizational buying behavior module section, we'll go into that in greater depth. Okay, there's shorter distribution channels in business to business. Right, there's a real emphasis on personal selling, and again, it's that personal selling, that ongoing relationship. And actually, there's a greater web integration because there's often online bidding portals. That's how customers both find work, you bid for work. A lot of it is done online, as well as in person. So it becomes integrated over time, and you have different modes entering at different stages. And there's also a lot of unique promotional activity. So if we remember, marketing is not just promotion. If we think about the 4 or the 7 P's, promotion is just one little aspect of it. And in the previous in the first lecture, we talked about price being key drivers. We touched on integrated marketing communications. We talked on quality. We touched on service. All of these things come together, and actually it forms an opportunity for really unique promotion. So the types of organizational markets that we're going to talk about are the commercial markets. And that was where I mentioned the distributors, original equipment manufacturers, users, organizations and retailers. So that's very much on the commercial, buying and selling, profit sector. Okay. You've then got institutional organizations, and that is the government-related organizations. So you've got schools, charities, churches, you've got not-for-profit, and this is the third sector as well. So you've also got the not-for-profit sector. So you can have charities and non-governmental organizations, UNICEF, Save the Children. They are all buying up food, they're buying up resources. So all of that needs to be taken into account when you're considering this. And then there's the governmental organisations that we've mentioned already: military, transportation, civil service, railway sectors, all markets that you can go into. So what do business customers buy? Now they can buy everything from raw materials to components to process materials. They can buy major equipment to make it, accessories. So even on the clothes that you and I buy, the buttons were made by someone, the cloth's made by someone, the cotton that puts it together is made by someone. Yes, you and I buy the final product, but actually behind all of that can be a whole range of industries that supply into it. Okay, you've got the business services, things from payroll equipment, you could enterprise software to run your business, consultancy. That's all. There's so many things that business customers buy, and which is why the business to business market is so vast and so diverse. So business to business marketing has different practices compared to consumer marketing. Whereas in consumer marketing, the selling process is very transactional, as I've already mentioned. Business markets often require system selling, understanding the system and the network as a whole, giving a product that solves multiple and very complex challenges. Personal selling is used extensively in business marketing, whereas in consumer marketing is fairly limited. Relationship are used extensively. So we're going to talk a lot about relationship management, relationship marketing, value, where value is derived. Consumer marketing, it's limited. Promotional strategies are very customer specific. Key account marketing, conversational marketing, inbound sales, but it's limited and it's very bespoke to the organization you're targeting or the customer you're targeting. Whereas consumer marketing tends to be more mass market. There's a greater web integration within business to business markets, okay? Whilst consumer markets are fairly limited, you and I just go onto Amazon, buy what we need and off we go. Businesses are a lot more integrated. Their entire businesses are often run on using the internet. You've got branding. So business to business organizations still place a value on branding, but it's less important than business to consumer. Okay, so whilst brands are still considered to be important and brand building cannot be neglected, because even businesses will acknowledge the importance of brands and that value and that brand promise and that reliability, often as a signal of a greater brand will have more longevity. There's more confidence in the fact that the company will keep going, as opposed to one-man bands or small and medium-sized enterprises, which can often be perceived as a risk to large companies. Because once you buy that product, once it's integrated into your organization, if that company stops operating or gets sold or changes its product in any way, you can actually end up costing yourself more in the long run. So buying from a brand makes companies feel a little bit more confident that the product will still be maintained in years to come. But that also then comes down to the type of product, how long the product's expected to last for, etc. So again, it's really complex, and this is why the system selling approach is so important, because actually it's understanding what all the needs are, how long the product needs to last, what is the lifetime, what is in place, which again comes back to that importance of personal selling and relationships. It's understanding the problem so that you can provide a solution. Market research is limited in business to business marketing because the market can often be opaque. Businesses don't disclose their needs and wants, and as such the market research can be hard to do, especially disc-based research. A lot of it happens to be personal selling, and it's those boundary spanners, those engineers that go speak with a customer. It's those salespeople that speak with a customer that tell you about what's going on in that market, who your competitors are, what they're doing. And again, it comes back to the importance of that relationship, because that is where a lot of your market research comes from. Whereas consumer marketing is quite extensive because it's really easy to get information about it's really easy to get information about you and I, customers. We give our information away on the internet. Facebook can target to within, an inch of your life. So market research is easy in consumer marketing. business to business, more it's harder so. And often because there's less customers in business to business, there's often less need to do it in the first place. But it doesn't mean that research isn't important. So it absolutely is. And as you know, this module is very much based around analysis, strategy, and tactics. Don't think because it's limited, it doesn't need to happen. All right. Segmentation can sometimes be unsophisticated, according to Brendan Canning and McDowell. And again, some people, and why I say it's unsophisticated is because people might target things arbitrarily, like, oh, we're going to go for small and medium-sized companies. Great. That could be anything from 2 people to 250 people. It's understanding the nuances of your organization, okay? So we'll go into the greater depths later on. Competitor awareness is lower in business marketing, whereas in consumer it's high because it's easy to see. It's all there for customers, because if the customer needs to be able to see it, to be able to find it, and it's all out there for everyone to see, whereas in business to business it can be a lot more opaque. And the product complexity, without a doubt, is greater in business marketing. Okay, so for instance, you wouldn't buy a train set just because you saw an ad on Instagram. You would actually have to go to the manufacturers, check that it goes through your tunnels, make sure it's the right gauge, make sure it's got the right capacity, how many seats, formats. It's very, very complex. You wouldn't just drop a few £1 million on a new train set, and I mean a literal train set, without going into depth and detail of what your needs are and how that can be met. Whereas in consumer marketing, the products are often fairly simple because the need is known, consumers know what they want, they just know what they want, and they go out and select a product. Different in business to business, and that's why it makes it so exciting. So you've seen Porter's value chain before, and what I want to highlight here, I'm not going to go teach you Porter's value chain, you've seen this in strategic management, but what I really want to show you here is that the primary activities, and if we all remember from Porter's value chain, is that the value is derived as the raw material passes through inbound logistics, so this is your raw materials, gets transformed in operations to the final good. Outbound logistics will then get it to your customer. Sales and marketing will decide on the channel of where it's going to be, how you're going to distribute it, who you're going to sell it to, who's going to act on your behalf, how you're going to actually make that sale. And then there's the after-sale service. Now, as a service, it is the customer that passes through this. So if you're on that service side of the continuum, how does the customer enter your business? How is it transformed? If you're an accounting business, what does the customer need to do? Bring their books, bring their receipts. What do they need to bring in to be transformed into the final product, which is the report, the final sets of books? How are you going to get these customers? How are you going to get your customer to recommend other customers? And what is the service you provide around that? Warranties, guarantees, etc. Again, not going to go into a huge amount of depth here.